My name is Micah Judy of Jonah, Micah Judy, the band, which is also coincidentally my name.
Hi, I'm Nicole Celeste Anderson, and I'm here with Micah today as a creative collaborator and partner.
This new album is 8 songs, and it's me kind of taking back my rock band roots, straying away from folk because I have electricity now, which is awesome, and I borrowed an electric guitar, and we've been producing this album together for like a year and a half or something like that.
This album is like probably some of the most rock in that it's electronic, and also I feel like a lot of his acoustic music was outrageously rock, but nobody could quite categorize it because they didn't know what to think about it because it was just a guitar and vocals. Yeah, when I met him, he was so cloaked in surrealism language that so obscuring anything that he might say that when we were sort of starting our romantic relationship, he like gave me a letter inside of like this see-through vellum envelope with like a bunch of, it was like his face photocopied, but he'd cut it up all into tiny little pieces. And like every single thing that he said to me was like a fragmented sentence with it like kind of interrupted, cut off, and then inverted. And then, like the week after we met, we were both creating this like profound amount of art, which we already were, which is why we thought the other one was so cool. We were both really prolific and cathartic and like generative and intuitive, and so we were like, wow. But so I made this piece of art and he was writing this song, and then afterward we came back together and I had drawn this picture and painted on it with, it was like a watercolor style, but it was with acrylics. And then he literally, while I had been doing that at his home, had written a song that's like, she dilutes acrylic, was one of his lyrics, and it was like separately that we done it. And the song read so much like it was about me, but when I was like, hey, this kind of reminds me of me, he's like, it's whatever you want it to be. It's like
it's open to interpretation.
Anytime I was like, hey, so is this song kind of related to me? He'd be like, songs are themselves and I have no control, blah, blah, blah. Like pretty much like total wall. Like I am not here to give you any reference points for what this might be about, and I have no intention of doing that. But it's like, at what point is this going to blossom into like a legitimate rock scene? Because he's just been so fringe in his like obscurity. How do you be a rock star and a parent in a pandemic? I mean, I don't know.
You just do it and then you get a radio interview virtually. This album for me is a rock revival. Like, I have been super into Nirvana and Tool and System of a Down and like all of these bands that were in the era that I grew up in, and stepping into a full band experience on a record has been like, what about rock? How is it patriarchal in a way that upset me? How is it racist in a way that upset me? How is it white in a way that upset me? And how is it accessing my emotions in a raw way, and how can I access my own experience and then try to, put that in a bottle, like, for a recording.
I'd like to let the audience know now where we can find this music when it's released on Halloween.
Sure, yeah. Well, you can go to jonahmicahjudy.com, where Micah is Michea. You can go to JMJmusic.net, which is the same website. Instagram handle is j.m.j.music. And Venmo, if anybody wants to tip for the record release or pre-order a copy, the Venmo is at JMJmusic.
At JMJmusic, that's the Venmo. Great.
On tile, 80 proof single malt fear. We're all fed the same seeds. Your last fight is here. Through the light on the last lane. magazines clinging with them. I know you're here, but you cannot stay. Legs to the clouds sway over my city. SWAT shields in a heart shape. March opens to start my spring. Arms are there, bring him in, bring him in, bring him in. I have grown far away. I have grown this way to fall through the lane of the last lane. Magazines clinging around. I know you're here, but you cannot stay. Oh, I'm trying to stop these rackets. Righteous click on my legacy. Arms full, iron into the lake. Arms full.
You want to be playing right now because you need the income, but otherwise, how do you feel about performing right now? Are you comfortable putting yourself at risk in that way? I mean, I've been struggling with it myself.
Well, I had decided before this global health crisis that the best performance context for me was like intimate house party. That's still pretty much what I do. Like, booking shows made me nervous enough before I could be putting people's lives in danger, and now I'm just like, okay, I'll just keep recording, and release more music. And I've been doing a lot of YouTube videos that are quasi-live, so it kind of feels like you're in a live performance setting with me, because I am fortunate enough now to have the studio equipment to make that happen. So if you go to the Jonah, Michea, Judy YouTube, you can see all kinds of like quarantine concerts and a perfectly safe way to listen to a local artist.
I greatly appreciate that, because something that I enjoy is presenting musicians on the radio and at venues, and I cannot bring myself to want to put my dear musicians at risk for doing anything like that right now. It's like the musicians to me are too important. Y'all are too important to risk yourselves so that I get a live, intimate show. It's like, and intimate is what I'm attracted to, in the studio and in venues. And I prefer a house concert, because of that intimacy. And intimacy isn't quite the plate right now.
It's challenging all of us to investigate our relationships with intimacy and how to have long-term relationships that can still nurture in the same way.
Yeah.
In some ways, like Micah mentioned, we've been nomadic and kind of isolated for a long time. We came back to Albuquerque about 4 years ago, though, so we've been in the process of building a lot of community since then. But prior to that, I had a lot of long-distance relationships. And so it's kind of nice right now in that, to use the cliche, it levels the playing field so that it's like everybody's kind of long distance, and it's making relationships that I have deeply valued for a long time with people on opposite coasts where they're actually, oh, like, you're really good at being present from far away. And I'm like, yeah, I've been here. And so I think that it's kind of changing our relationship to how we have creative collaboration, how we create music, how we have relationships. And also, I feel like it's such a good boundaries crash course, or like who's completely not versed in boundaries. I feel like the pandemic has definitely highlighted some of that.
Right. It highlights disparities in skill sets for regulatory systems and trauma management multi-generationally. You know, I mean, people are having to negotiate with their parents and grandparents love and boundaries. Like, we're not going to
hang out with you, Grandma.
We're not going to get these people sick based on this information that we have about what keeps us as safe as we can be, and these are my needs in relation to that. And I feel like the pandemic has highlighted disparity, which is already there across the globe.
Yeah, and it makes it all a little bit harder. Agoraphobics. Is there a walls closing in essence being invoked there?
Well, you know, it's funny because this album has mostly been written before this happened.
Aha.
This stuff, but
this is another example of you listen to an album a couple of years later and you're like, oh, I know what was going on back then.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to see myself coming full circle on so many things and already processing so much of what needs to be processed right now. This album feels timely to me in a more specific way than perhaps my previous ones have been. And I keep being like, you know, how do I fully bring this to life in this financially challenging context? And Nicole's just been like, this is the context. Like, you are a musician in the 20s in a pandemic, and, you know, I feel like I'm overwhelmed with an empathy response because of the pandemic. Like, when I'm around people, I want to keep everyone safe, and then I'm stressing out because there are so many people and I only have control over me. But bringing that into present context and saying, I've had anxiety, I've been working with anxiety and depression and PTSD for years, and so Agoraphobics is actually, you know, I was kicking it around as a band name when I first started playing with a drummer here in Albuquerque years ago. It landed on this album like, oh yeah, all the musicians I collaborate with are terrified, and so am I. And you know, this is us coming together from across the country to make a record. So
well, and that is what I appreciate so much about it, is that I thank you for your experience and for sharing that with us with this music. Know that this is a gift that you're giving, the poetry and the songwriting and all of it. It's very useful for others. And at this time, I just really appreciate musicians like yourself creating and giving right now on your YouTubes, on your website, and even releasing albums. Like, do you realize that you're amazing? Because like you're creating an album during all of this, and I'm like barely doing my radio show.
And so I want to point out that invalidation of your own creative process and your own intrinsic motivations, like, that's part of what I'm processing on this record. I mean, this is the closest thing to a concept album that I think I've ever made. And I push myself really hard on a record, and I'm processing all the stuff the songs are bringing up for me while I'm working on them, and mixing and engineering is a whole other part of that. You know, I've had to listen to this record for a year and a half, and on this one, I kind of gave myself permission to have more fun and experience more joy. And, you know, like, I dropped a couple songs from it that were taking me to somewhere I didn't want to be. And so it's like 8 responses to loss and trauma for me as a concept. Like, you know, so I've got like a specific thing for each song that I identify with. And I've never been one who likes to push narrative in oh, this is a song about flowers. This is a song about flowers. Like, that's always bothered me. So obviously there's metaphor, but I'm allowing myself to be a little more narrative with it, and a little more like, I mean, this is looking at how to set boundaries and what you want to make love into, and how you're gonna shine your best on the little time that you've got here on the planet. And I think that contextualizing yourself across generations of grieving and trauma and pain and healing and just making the next most better step you can for your life and your family and whoever you can reach in your sphere is all that I can hope to do with a record.
With Hello Clarice, with this band out of LA that he was writing songs for, he received the, I think of it like a landscape, but like the background instruments. And so he had to put vocals in, and he'd be like,
top lining.
He was like, so what fits here? And so I did this whole kind of storyboard mapping with all of the songs, like, well, this sounds like kind of like you're out in an auditorium lying down in a field, and or whatever it was.
One of the songs, she drew this picture for me, and then I wrote the lyrics for
and
the
so
picture.
It was like, that process has made it so that we actually can kind of be in each other's creative spheres a little more and collaborate a little more. And so that's been really fun for me, because I've always been like a major fan of his music. I mean, you would assume so, but it's fun to be able to have a little bit more of a personal interaction. And then also that means that like when he was saying he brings me some of the songs, I'm like, I think we need to build up these layers a little bit more, then cut it down so it can crescendo or whatever. So like we're getting to the point that the two of us are less tender or sensitive or like hiding, we can say more directly like, yeah, this is where I'm at with this creative process without it being like this big secret. Like,
Yeah.
so like learning how to have a creative practice where you're not like so afraid of the little dewy morning blossom like evaporating that you can kind of bring it to somebody
Absolutely.
is like a really fun stage in creative collaboration. And so I think that's another piece on this album too, is that I think that he has a little more confidence that it's not just all going to get wiped away in the spring breeze or what, you know.
When you're used to disassociating, when you are near other people based on your trauma history or whatever, like creative space for me became this fighting to exist. Like, this is my song, it comes from within my dreams and it's mine. But that was such a personal experience when I started to share it. I recognize parallels, you know, like in interviews with Kurt Cobain where people are trying to talk to him about lyrics and he's just like, you know, whatever, you know, it's open to interpretation. That was one of the things I wanted to move away from. Like, if you have a rock album, how can you talk about it? How can you have it be a little tender and just a little vulnerable and have that be okay?
To maybe validate my own experience so I can continue building up your impressiveness with creating this album at this time. I definitely think it's like amazing that I'm doing my radio show. So you're creating an album and I'm like, I'm amazing and you're amazing. So
yay.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the validating each other thing, is like, we really don't have to be in this competitive energy with each other. When artists are out there synthesizing the world, I've said this metaphor so many times, but I think of it as like microorganisms in compost. Like, there are literally so many toxins that we need as many well-versed artists on board as possible to digest what's going on. And I am just like here to say, I'm going to be here, you know, like, let's keep being in community together long term. I'm looking forward to that. And
absolutely,
that's, I feel like Micah and I are both really in that position right now in a big way with a lot of people. Like, let's be in community. That's how we survive.
And how can we collaborate on something creative that's going to uplift us both and help us process what's happening?
On that subject, I feel like leaning towards Indigenous wisdom and leadership of people of color and going, okay, let's decolonize, and how as white people can, you know, how can I show up to own my own inner work as much as possible, you know, just like community making and trauma work and healing and intuition and making these surrealist relationships all together is a creative practice. And I love reminding people of that. It's not all like, okay, over there is pain and over here is pretty art. It's like they are very much
exactly
all together.
Thank you for sharing that with the audience, that community making is an art form. And no matter what happens and what changes, the people behind it all will still be there. Or, you know, we lost a lot of businesses, for example. And it's like, well, the business closed down, but those people are still there. And they can come back and do something else. And so we can't forget about the people. It's not just a business. It's not just a whatever. It's that those are individuals that are behind those efforts. And they will always be providing effort into the community in some way. So wherever they go, they'll still be there. So, and that's also why I thank you so much for putting this album together so that I can play it. It means a lot. It makes me really excited for the show. So,
well, thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think this is my first radio show.
You're welcome.
So
I was like, wait a minute, you haven't been on an interview with me.
Yay! I love that.
And I'm also an artist of like every medium, and I recently realized that that is totally acceptable, and I'm not planning on like surrendering or like having some focus. Like, I do all of them, and that's okay.
Nicole is an amazing artist of every medium, including the ones you don't consider mediums. And her website is nicoleceleste.co.uk, and mine is jonahmicahjudy.com or jmjmusic.net, since you don't know how to spell Micah, which is okay.
All right. But for those of you that are interested, it's Michea.
That's right. Wow. Thank you. And thanks for having me.